Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast, Tony and Russ Dunning. Hey, so we want to take you guys back and talking about training. We've kind of talked about program. We've been talking about highly high performance. And so we want to make this a practical approach to training, and we're going to discuss, the stimulus of why we want to talk about it again today, but also what we're doing with the different groups we work with. So we have some great partnerships and some great teams, whether it be a corporate environment, whether it be a tactical community, or whether it be more of a sports community, how we take this concept of training and how we build training programs for these people in a very custom, real way. So, this kind of hit me again the other day. We've been going through a lot of interviews with staff. So looking at interviewing, people for other positions. We're starting a clinic in Vegas. I was just in Vegas this weekend for the new clinic that we're opening up. And we interviewed, 10 people with that interview process. We've interviewed several students this year that are coming in as PT students. That's super exciting. We have, 6 coming in next week. And then we have many more on the docket for the next 2 years. So we interview people all the time. And food for thought, tip for you guys, one of our interview questions is, if you were going to do a workout today, what's your workout? And the reason we ask that question is that because most of the time you're going to be passionate about your workout, and therefore you're going to be passionate about coaching others to work out in the same way that you do, right? That's common practice, that if I love to work out in a certain way, I'm probably going to share it with other people to work out in the same way. It's unlikely that I would really be passionate about doing a certain form of working out like powerlifting and then teach someone else how to do CrossFit. Mm-hmm. Although there's common ground, it's unlikely that you're going to teach that way. So anyways, we're always interested to see, what do you do? How do you think? Because if you say that you do some stupid shit, then that makes me think that you're not very smart. Yeah. Because you're putting your body through stupid shit. And I have a problem with that. Yeah. So anyways, it's a great question. And it gets us to kind of really talk about how do you look at exercise and how do you program for yourself and why do you do it and all those good things. So it makes it a fun conversation. So, but most of our responses here, this is what concerns me and why to bring the topic back up, is probably 80% of the time the response is, all right, well, today's chest and bis or chest and tris, and tomorrow's shoulders and back. And then Wednesday is leg day. And then whatever, at that point, I'm like, oh my God, this is still happening. Yeah.
Whatever book was read, that was probably written, 4 decades ago. It's still clearly being circulated in the bodybuilding culture. It's a bodybuilding split.
It is. So. It's a genius bodybuilding split. We just had a conversation here with our tactical guys at 2A Pro, and Russ was just going over their workouts with them. We're doing some customized stuff for them and for their followers. And there was if you're going to build muscle, Russ is on a soapbox, then do this. Yeah. But it's very, very different than programming and training an elite athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to build some delts. You want to build some shoulder muscles. You want to I want to increase my lat size. And usually when people talk about muscles and they talk about exercises, fatiguing certain muscles, oftentimes we're thinking about the mirror. This is beauty. It's advanced beauty. But, you're thinking about I want this muscle bigger. What would really stump people is then you ask, why do you want it bigger? Oh, no, that's...
Yeah.
That gets you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you want your bicep bigger? Oh, why? I just want to look better naked, which is oftentimes I think okay, so call it what it is.
Which is the fine reason.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I'm glad people are exercising. So, whenever I see bodybuilding, it's great, bodybuild. But it's definitely not more than building hardware. You're building hardware in specific ways.
Yeah. So to be clear, we're not anti any of these strategies. We're not anti CrossFit or anti bodybuilding. They're phenomenal tools. We're not anti powerlifting by any means, So the question is, as always, what are we trying to do? Why, like Russ is asking, why are you doing it? Why are you doing this exercise? So if we're training a tactical athlete or we're training an athlete of any kind of a sport, they don't train the same way that powerlifters train, that Olympic lifters train, that bodybuilders train. Their training programs are engineered differently. And most of the programs that we provide at KIME and that we're giving people are on this athlete mindset, which is what we've come to call functional training over the last 15 years, is a functional training approach where you're not necessarily carving out specialized days.
Right.
You're not saying, hey, today's back and bis or chest and tris, but today is very similar to what Wednesday would be, which is a whole body approach. You're going to get some chest in, you're going to get some back in, you're going to get these different things in. You're going to get legs in, but you're going to get them all in together every day.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So if you were to train as an athlete in college, the college workout, basically you only have time for an hour, and there's usually 20 to 60 people on your team, and you go into the weight room and there's only so much time and there's one coach. There's basically the traditional college workout, there's 5 exercises. So you're going to either Olympic lift if it's appropriate for your team, and most of the time you lift it regardless whether it's appropriate or not, but that's for another day. But Olympic lift, squat, or deadlift will kind of alternate days. And then there's a push and a pull. So like a chest push and some kind of pull. And then maybe you get some other accessory motion that's exciting or fun or maybe relevant to your sport if you've got a good coach.
So that's shoulder, rotator cuff work, or some core stability.
Yeah, core is often thrown in there, something like that, to do some sort of lunge rotation thing, something like that, which is great. But basically, you got 5 exercises in the course of an hour, and you're in a big team, so quality is not the big thing. It's about getting load on the body. So, but it's the same kind of concept, this multifunctional training. It's if you're in personal training or you're working with performance community, you take that same battery and you're going to expand on it a bit. You're going to add quite a few more movement specific things. I wouldn't say sports specific, but movement specific, where you're going to work on someone's rotational ability or lateral directional mobility, or how do they tolerate load outside their base of support if that's what they have to do in their sport. So you start working with them in these different complex. But I want to point out the differences, and I think we should speak to the differences in these different types of workouts. Like, what is the common ground? Because I wonder if people don't know. I've been concerned because the number of people that are coming in still doing bodybuilding workouts that aren't in a bodybuilding field. Yeah. And bodybuilding is not wrong. It's right for me. If you're really injured, bodybuilding is actually a great, great tool because it can really isolate things. It's very, very safe. Yeah. Whereas Olympic lifting, powerlifting, and functional training can be less safe because it's demand you to work outside of your normal comfort zone.
And I think that hits home perfectly. And if you're looking for something safe, say you're a rather sedentary office worker, and you really just need something to stimulate your bones from becoming brittle and stimulate enough muscle and tendons so that you have good longevity in your body, then doing something safe might work. But as soon as you say, like, well, I really want to be able to build a fence in my backyard. I want to be able to handle concrete. I want to be able to manage my horse. I have some animals at the house. Or, say, going back to our military guys, say there was Armageddon and I'm going to have to protect my family against anything. Once you have like a broader perspective of like, what should my body be able to tolerate? Now you need to really look outside of hardware and really be understanding software. And software is your nervous system. Can your nervous system understand how to coordinate patterns? And can they become resilient in all these awkward patterns, whether it's a rotational pattern or a hinge pattern? And now we're concerned about, how big are your glutes and lats and shoulders are. That's like something. But how you use that athletically is a bigger piece of it. And then that kind of floats right to your cardiopulmonary system, your cardio, so to speak, or your conditioning.
Right. So if we look at like the bodybuilding model that Arnold built, this is really on Arnold's framework, and he really he moved the fitness needle in the United States at an unbelievable level. And the reason that we in the United States commonly use this model is mostly because of his fame and his writings, and which is fantastic. So if you want to do a hypertrophy work and grow a muscle, this is the master strategy, is you basically bury it. So in a session, you might do chest and tries. You might do, if you're doing 4 sets of 10 on a bench press or something, or they might do more than that, 5 or 6 sets of 10 on a bench press. Let's say you do 4 sets of 10, that's 40 reps. And then you go and do a chest fly, another 3 or 4 sets of 10. That's another 30 or 40 reps. Now you're at 80 reps. And then you might go do, some other chest movement, incline bench. Now you got another 40 reps.
So at 120, and if you do that once a week for a month, you're at 600 reps. And if it's all, north of 60% of your 1RM, that's going to build muscle. Yep. It's not rocket science to hit all different angles and get a bigger muscle out of that.
Exactly. So the muscle is going to grow and it will become stronger doing those movements, but it won't be very functionally strong. So if you do this for every body part, then you look more and more like a bodybuilder. And if that's your intention, to look better in the mirror and look a little bigger and put on some mass, then that is a great, safe, good strategy. That's probably not the guy. Like, you wouldn't pick Arnold to be on your basketball team or to play soccer with you, because he's pretty big and bulky and he's kind of slow, right? But he could probably set a great screen or block like crazy, but he's probably not going to be your best rebounder. He's not going to be very springy. He's not going to throw a ball very far because of the way that he's designed his body to function is not that way. So you have to keep that in mind. If that's what you want, great. If you want to be an athlete, then you need a piece of that, but not quite to the same load. All right? So let's look at another model, say like a CrossFit model, what CrossFit did really well. So CrossFit is actually very functional training oriented. They've made up a few new exercises that really weren't seen at the level before, like a muscle up, for example. Some of the ball toss things are different.
Hip thrusters and handstand push-ups and, not to mention power cleans with the rep scheme of 30 times 3.
So that's what I want to talk about is that the biggest thing with CrossFit that they changed outside of adding a few exercises and adding the gymnastics component, which is genius. We love this, by the way. It's very, very good. But what got them the term of dangerous, which I don't think CrossFit is necessarily dangerous, but any workout's dangerous if you don't do it properly. But the risky thing with CrossFit, or where they lose some ground in my mind, is they've taken an exercise like a power clean or a snatch, and they're doing it for time. So when you say, hey, I want you to do this at a certain level of intensity, and I want you to see how many reps you can do in this period of time, whether it be 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. So the concept here is that we're going to take you to fatigue, to max effort fatigue, which is great for building everything, building the nervous system, building strength, all this good stuff. The problem is that if it's a multi-joint, overhead, highly complex exercise, taking it to fatigue after some number of, to Russ's point, 20 reps, 30 reps of snatch, you would never program that in Olympic lifting or in the weight room in college for an athlete. You would never program 30 reps of snatch. You might do 9 reps of snatch, like 3 reps of 3, maybe 4 reps of 4, but you would never do this high repetition volume of more than like 15, 16 because you get tired.
Yes.
So if you're going to be tired and you're lifting this weight overhead repetitively, the likelihood that you hurt something is very, very high.
Yeah. I'm thinking of every, multi-gazillion dollar throwing arm, like a Tom Brady's shoulder or, the best pitcher out there, whatever his name is. They would never be caught doing this because the risk is tremendous.
That's insane.
And so then the question would be like, well, why are you doing it? And that's
great. Back to the why. So great fitness. I think CrossFit was amazing community. They nailed the community thing, nailed the fun exercise dynamic, nailed the competition aspect of it. I mean, so good in so many ways. And I still think it's a great system and a great tool. But I think, again, what are you doing? What do you want? Why do you want it? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to get your cardiovascular system in shape and become like they say, the fittest athletes on earth, I think they've nailed it.
Yeah.
If that's your ambition, then that's great. It's not going to be the fastest, most explosive guy.
For sure.
And it's not necessarily going to be the strongest guy, but they do move their own body very, very well for long periods of time, and they've mastered that skill set.
Well, I remember back in the early to mid 2000s when CrossFit existed purely in the online world, and it was all just people creating workouts. It was a collection of people. Mm-hmm. I know Greg Glassman, I think that's his name. He was a part of it, but it was really just like a collection of people that said like, "Hey, gang, try this workout for time."
Right.
And he did, push up, pull up, squat, do a mile run, do 100 burpees, and then like they'd make stuff up, and they're like, "All right, this is it. Who got the best time?" And you just do it over and over again, like, "Oh, I got a time of 23 minutes, right?" And then it evolved because once people can only do so many push-ups, squats for time and mile runs,
right,
it started like evolving. Like, let's do weirder and weirder shit, and then that's when the thrusters and the muscle ups and the hang cleans came in. Like, let's start doing some things that are very hard. That when you do a gymnastics session, a gymnast will train for 8 hours and they'll barely break a sweat often because they're such high nervous system, high power. They need rest so that they can do that set activity with maximum power again. And same thing with a Olympic lifter. Lots of rest in between sets because they're not interested in conditioning. They're interested in increasing power.
Yes.
And
in that particular skill.
In that skill. And then now you take CrossFit, like, hey, let's take these really hard exercises. And now we're going to bury people with them. And you will. You will bury people.
Fantastic. And then they give a great opportunity for people, I think, that were coming out of college and looking for a highly competitive environment. A lot of them are former college athletes looking to continue to train and be competitive. And I think CrossFit's been a great tool for them, great vehicle. So if you look at other vehicles like powerlifting, powerlifting is a sport. Okay, it consists of the deadlift, the squat, and the bench press, and each of them are for max amounts of weight. So how much can you do one time? So the training for that is the West Side Barbell Method and several folks out there doing some amazing stuff. it's about loading and really practicing techniques of these lifts, loading it over time, many, many years typically. And then they layer it in with many accessory workouts, accessory lifts to facilitate your ability to move these heavy weights. So it's very good. They don't move very fast. They move very, very slowly. Like, so a deadlift at a powerlifting meet might take 3 to 5 seconds to get just from the start of the lift to the completion of the lift, which is odd. That's called powerlifting.
Yeah.
Now that
but they're moving that slow. It's like first gear. How good is first gear? Like, well, it's powerful. It's a powerful first gear.
Yeah, that's for sure. But it's a maximum amount of weight, and they're looking at what they call the sum of all three of those numbers together. They get a score out of that, and that's usually what they're looking for, is that sum. So a phenomenal tool to develop strength and those particular patterns is really that exist. And then Olympic lifting is a sport in itself as well. Typically consists of the snatch and the jerk. But to do the snatch and the jerk, you do power cleans and hang cleans and different movements to establish that control and strength. Again, it takes years to develop the skill sets of this. But Olympic lifting is much more about speed. In this case, you have to lift a certain amount of weight as fast as you can, usually to an overhead position. And it's not saying that you have to lift it fast for the nature of the requirement, but the nature is you have to get the weight over your head. So the only way to do that is to be explosive, use power, and actually execute at full force, full speed, get it overhead, catch it, and then stand up with the weight.
The similarity between both powerlifting and Olympic lifting is we're using a barbell, which is a fixed tool that's in front of you. And typically you're in a bilateral stance for most of the time, unless obviously if you're doing like a split jerk or you're finishing with the push press out of a clean or the push jerk, you're going to split your stance. But for the most part, you're generating a ton of power in a bilateral stance. And that's what's the similarity. It's a very important point because you're missing, I'd say 95% of athleticism is not in that position.
Right.
But it's phenomenal power. You are owning the power curve both with a heavy implement going slow and then more of a medium weight implement that you're moving very, very fast and ballistically. So it has different portions of the power curve for sure.
Yeah. No, the fact that you're speaking about that now, let's jump right into it. I thought it was interesting. So I was on a plane this weekend, and I was hanging out with Logan, who is one of our interns, who's actually doing an internship at another place, a very high-profile training facility, which is outstanding. And we were talking about the workouts that the guys were going through, that the athletes was that he was training. So this is very high-profile athletes that he's training with this group. And one of the exercises they were doing was a lot of box squatting. Almost everybody's doing a version of box squatting. And so I asked him, because I've always had a difficult time with box squats, honestly. They don't resonate with me. I've never had anyone explain it to me to say, like, this is a great exercise for this reason. People just seem to do it. So I asked for clarity on the box squat. What are they doing? Are they going down a squat to touch their bottom and then they come right back up? Or are they actually sitting and unloading themselves and then coming back up? He's like, no, they're just touch and go. And I was like, okay. And then I asked him I said, well, why? Why are we programming this for this group of people? And so he didn't know. And he's like, well, I'll make sure to ask. And I'm like, good, that should always be your first question. Why are we doing the exercises we're doing? Because that they should have a purpose.
Yeah. You would hope it would go something like, well, to lift more weight. And then, is that the only measure of success? Like, well, they'll get more power as measured by,
Right.
Well, maybe they're going to jump higher, or they're going to sprint faster, maybe, or they're going to cut better. And it's like, we have to keep asking, well, what's the goal with that? What's the goal with that? And if you don't have an aim there, you are just like lost in minutia.
Yes.
You're a technician that just loves weird exercises.
Exactly. And that's what we have to get away from. You want to be able to develop this linear path of like, here's my person, here's what they're trying to do, and if I do this now, it'll allow them to be better at strength or something. Then they'll be able to do this, which can help me improve power. And then I'm going to take that power and I'm going to transfer it with some sort of broad jump or bounding or something, so that eventually they'll be able to transfer it to speed. That makes a difference on the field. So that's the point of this whole thing. So as we were talking about it, one, he didn't know, which that was interesting. And then he goes, I think they're using it just to teach them technique. Because this is not a group that typically lifts a lot. They don't have a lot of lifting history, right? Yeah, so that's fair. Yeah. Like, okay, that's a fair idea. You can use the box for a technique to squat down, have your butt touch the target behind you. It teaches you kind of how to hinge and squat properly. Stay on the heels. I'm good with all that. But then, of course, it begs me to ask the question, why don't you just do front squats?
Yeah.
If you have a form problem, then let's just front squat or goblet squat for that matter.
Yeah, it's so my brain just hurts right now, frankly. So I grew up in a time when my martial arts instructor, it was a Korean art, but he was also heavily influenced with Filipino arts. And it was very, so we had a hard style to our martial art and then also a very flow style. And it was always about finding freedom in the body. And so we'd always get ourselves in the deepest positions, the hardest positions. It could be like a lateral lunge, could be a Cossack squat. We'd always, sit on our heels and knees and kind of sit all the way back and lay backwards. So we were always expressing a lot of freedom with our training. And then we would do slow tension squats all the way, ass to grass all the way. And in finding freedom in the body and challenging the body in all these ways, when I first learned to squat, it was really freaking easy. Front squat, Zercher squat, back squat, pistol squat, didn't matter. It's like, oh, I can put my body in that position. Of course I can. My point is, when you try and teach any person that's learning at a very finite, focused, we got to do it just like this. The feet need to go just like this. If you over-focus on something really technical of a human expression that is literally sitting into a campfire and getting into and putting a little thing in the stick in the fire and you're just sitting down to a deep squat. This is human. We should be able to express this just by living.
Yeah.
And so when coach is like, we gotta have the perfect position, the knees gotta be right out here, the foot's gotta be right here, I think we're going about it wrong. We're like this, if done right, you should say I want you to do sumo, conventional, front, Zercher, in any position and you can express it.
Figure
it out. Give them, if you want to have people squat better, have them solve a proper problem, not here's a box.
Yep.
Talk about a Western thought. We put the toilet 25 inches up, sit on the fucking toilet. Really?
Yeah.
They sit on toilets all the time. They sit on boxes all the time.
It's a bad idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then you have all these, to your point, all these extra things about an athlete who's very, very free and needs to control his body in space with other random loads. Now we have a rack, we have a bar, and we have a box, and we're trying to say, do it this way. The whole thing is kind of dumb if you think about it like that, right? And this is not picking on this situation at all. This applies, because I've had this conversation a gazillion times, so it applies to all strength training. Just let's ask the question. I'm not saying you should never do it, but just have a very good reason why. I would think this way, and I'm not a squat historian by any means, but I'm pretty sure that the process went at some time in our history. And look back at the Russians, the way they used to work out. I assume it kind of went like this. That people were squatting, to your point, Russ. They were fighting themselves. They maybe got to a pistol squat, and they're like, we need to add some load. This is getting easier. I should add some weight. Maybe it's a sandbag. Maybe it's some sort of Zercher or rock. Or maybe maybe they have the kettlebells were in early form, or some piece of iron, something heavy. Mm-hmm. And you held it in front of you, I anticipate, and you squatted down, much like we call a goblet squat today. Mm-hmm. And then someone maybe came up with an idea at some point to be like, and doing deadlifts and doing Olympic lifting kind of came about very early on in the world. It's been around for hundreds of years. And building this kind of bar and then adding weight to the bar. We could add a lot of load if we use a barbell, which is a fine idea. And then I'm sure they cleaned it and then they did front squats with it, because that was the way to add squatting weight in that situation. And then at some point, the person probably could no longer front squat that weight. Mm-hmm. And they failed, and I just can't hold it anymore. I physically, it's 225. It's a heavy weight. I can't hold it anymore. Mm-hmm. What if I put it on my back? That would probably be, maybe I could hold it. Maybe I could hold more weight there easier. Mm-hmm. So they probably had to rig up some sort of contraption to get this barbell on the person's back. Probably multiple people at first, and hey, what if we built a rack? We could build a squat rack, right? And then we build a squat rack, and now it holds the bar for us, and then now we can squat this heavy weight. So I assume that it probably went something like that with some people.
Yeah, and then in that thought process, I think the pursuit of it was just to simply get a bigger muscle.
Yes.
I think it stopped.
Or to get stronger.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah, we need more strength, because in that mind frame, it's more is better, which or
they're competing with their friends, but either way.
That's right. And I love that. I love stronger is better. I'm a big fan of get strong.
Yeah.
Big fan of it. But I grew up doing back squats and front squats and split squats. And yeah, clearly, you can lift heavier back squats. So it's more exciting. But it's also but
it didn't start that way.
Yes, right.
And that's my point, is that if it didn't start that way, how are we training people?
Yeah.
Why are we asking these people to back squat with a box?
Yes.
The solution is put the weight in front of them and ask them to figure it out.
Yes. So biomechanically, for all those if you haven't taken a course in biomechanics, if you put any weight in front of you, your back muscles have to match that with a ton of muscle contraction. So anything right here, your paraspinals are going to contract fierce. Now, every action has a reaction. And if your paraspinals are going to compress with 800 pounds of force like they're capable of, then that means the front side has to work, or else your back is literally going to be ripped out, okay? So when people do heavy zerchers or heavy front squats, the thing that gets tired is not your back, it's your stomach. It's so freaking hard to hold on to that compression right here. Your back muscles will do it. Whether or not your stomach has the ability to counter that force, it is proven by people saying, I can't do it anymore. It's their midsection that gives out, rarely their legs. Where you do a back squat, and if the weight is right on the spine, the back muscles have a very easy job. You could put 1,000 pounds on your back. It's not going to be that hard on your back, whereas if you try and lift 1,000 pounds in a zercher position, holy shit.
Right.
You won't be able to do it.
Exactly.
So that's exactly, I think, speaking to the developmental piece of how humans have solved the problem. And it's a very important riddle to solve, because if you don't teach people how to solve that, you're messing them up. Back to, I do chest and tries, back and bis, and I hit legs with leg press and back squat. Yeah. Holy cow. Have we not gotten smarter in this process?
Yeah, that's it. And we want to make sure too to recognize there's probably a developmental process that as a human, you learn how to do certain things over time. And now we're just teaching people how to use the cheat way, like just back squat. And I have to bring in we see it all the time. People bring in the toes, the heels up, toes down, the tib guy stuff. We see all these special gimmicks to be able to squat better. Like, first off, we have a process we call earn the bar. Earn the bar, meaning lift other weights to a high level of capacity. And as you start to fatigue out with those, you can no longer lift the weights because your grip is giving out and you're finding challenges at substantial loads. Then move to a barbell. And then do it in the front squat in a very similar position that you started with. And then when you've maxed out that ability, then move to a back squat. But that would make so much more sense to the body than to just like try to get yourself in this awkward position, get underneath this heavy, heavy load, and then try to figure out how to lower down on it when you don't know how to lower down with your own body weight in the first place.
I have a great story. I know we talked about the squat, but I have a great story about a bodybuilder, a Mr. Olympia champion I worked with. And his press, he was able to press about 140 pounds in each hand with a dumbbell bench press. And he's seen me because his shoulder's constantly hurt. And then he told me, like, I have had some MRI images, and my bicep tendon's chronically torn, and my rotator cuff's chronically torn. And he said, but I can manage. I'm still competing. I'm only 33. And long story short, his rotator cuff was fairly weak. It only had about maybe 25 to 27 pounds of pressure for a guy who compressed 140 with a horizontal bench press. And then I asked him how much he does a military press with. He goes, that tends to hurt, so I only keep it around like 55 or 60 pounds. And I just did quick math for him. I said, you're pressing less than half vertically that you are horizontally. That's a massive imbalance. You've been training this very linear position and in short range of motion excessively. You have all these huge muscles. Like his delts were probably 3 times the size of mine. His pec and upper body, easy. He weighs about 100 pounds more than I do, for sure. And
he's only pressing 55 pounds.
Yeah. I'm like, really? You can only rotate out 25 pounds? Now that's say I'm the world's strongest man, but I can rotate out 35 pounds.
How much can you press, Russ?
I can press 80 pounds pretty clean, strict one-arm press. Strict. And this guy's only pressing 50. He looks like a refrigerator compared to me. And he lifts all the time. That's the thing. It's not like, he's injured. This is actually how he's been competing and training. I'm like, oh my goodness, bud. You're training all the wrong ways, and you're a professional bodybuilder that wins awards. And I wanted to help him. Like, you have it all wrong. Yep. You're ripping your body apart the way you're training. You're ripping your body apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Without even knowing it.
Without knowing it. I think that's the worst thing is that's actually what's so interesting. I mean, imagine going to a race car driver where the guy's like this, he's the fastest driver in the world, and he has a horrible car. That's kind of like what we're talking about here. Yeah. It's a really weird conundrum.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, you train so hard.
And they keep doing the same work.
Same
I
way.
need to do more chest. I have to do more chest.
Yes.
It's like, don't you think your chest is done enough? Like,
Yes.
we probably need to balance this thing out and like give you some more tools to like, so the chest is something to pull on, you know?
Yes. Now, to all the people who are going to respond here, all 3,000 people are listening. They might
The
say,
world's number one
well,
podcast.
Well, Russ, what if that's his intent? Is he only wants to look good in the mirror? Then say, fair. That will be his intent until he's not able to train that way because he just ripped his body apart.
Yeah. Well, then he's unhealthy. So now he can't continue to do bodybuilding even. He's ruined that opportunity. Yeah. So yeah, the whole idea then is preservation, which means have some balance to it.
Yes.
And so your argument for balance in this case would be, obviously he's doing a lot of chest work, doing some overhead press.
Yes.
So overhead press has been highly scrutinized as a negative exercise. I think it would be the same idea that we had with knee extensions back in the late 90s. So these are dangerous, which we now know is not the case. And it's actually a critical part of the rehab process as well as training. I think chest press is a similar argument. People are like, that overhead press has been, anything overhead is absolute no-no.
Yes.
And if you think about the way we move, as overhead press is actually much more ergonomic, much more natural for the body.
Yeah, you use 800 muscles rather than 8.
Yeah. Now, in doing so, I would highly suggest you do it standing and you do it one arm at a time.
Yeah.
Because that is, to your point, it can be all the muscles you have working in a cohesive fashion, in a kinetic linking fashion, versus anything you're doing for chest is most likely in an isolated fashion.
And that is not common knowledge. I had another female bodybuilder that was in the gym, and she was about to do seated military press. I told him, I probably wouldn't do that if I were you.
Yeah.
And she's like, are you kidding me? This is the only way to, she kind of, acted like I was an idiot. It's the only way to do military press or else your back is going to get hurt. Don't you know that? And I said, then that's your limiting factor, sweetheart.
Yeah.
You don't have the stomach for the overhead press. And until you put your body together at its base to be able to do it overhead, you shouldn't.
Exactly.
You should earn that right by doing it pain-free and successfully, or else stop doing it. Stop doing a heavy military seated, what are we doing here if we're not doing this in the midsection?
And this is where bodybuilding is so safe, right? Because it's so safe for her because the chair, the seat gives her stability.
Yeah.
So it allows her to cheat to herself and actually do more exercise than she should.
Yes, and then get these big muscles.
But she's still vulnerable in life because she's actually not functionally strong.
Yeah, it happens a lot. I'm sure, for all the physical therapists listening, they've seen it, of a person that comes in with these big muscles, and yet they got hurt by lifting dog food.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not a good situation. Talk about overpowered.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully this gives you some light of the different types of programming and the different approaches. So the functional training part, where we spend most of our time, is looking at all of these angles, dimensions, what's the goal of the athlete, and then putting together a program, which oftentimes we put together in like an upper lower body circuit combined. So we might have them do like an upper body exercise that might be very, very challenging, and then superset that with something that's lower body in nature. Maybe definitely those two things together. Maybe there's a third item, like an explosive motion or a core exercise or a carry of some kind. They might go into this like threesome group of exercises. And then maybe you'd have 2 or 3 groups of 3 in a particular workout, right?
I think that works so well when you do these kind of trip sets. And I think it's nice when they don't terribly compete with one another. We're not going to do a swing pattern and a squat pattern in the same trip set.
Yeah.
I think it's also good to do something that feels a little more like isolation, that targets an area that's commonly weak. That could be a rotator cuff. It could be, some part of the front part of your stomach, or a diagonal core exercise, maybe a balance drill. So I think something that is a little bit more on the stability, motor control, balance part of the equation, and then something that's kind of bigger for the lower and bigger for the upper.
Yeah. Exactly. So if you're organized this for home, you might think, if you want to think really general, think lower body exercise, upper body exercise, and then some sort of accessory or a core exercise would give you like 3 things. If you just chose 3 things, it could be like either a deadlift, squat, step up, or a lunge as a lower body thing. And then you could do either a vertical push, vertical pull, horizontal push, horizontal pull for the arm thing. And then you could do some sort of carry or plank for the core. And if you just rotated what those 3 things were and developed, 3 or 4 of those matching groups, do 2 or 3 of those in a day, and that's your workout. And then a day or 2 later, pick another 2 or 3 of those groups and hit it again. And you can have this variety, which is going to produce phenomenal strength for you.
Yep.
It's going to be phenomenal control. It's totally body. It has a conditioning component.
Yep.
And then you make it more relative to what it is that you want. So if you're playing football, you need a lot of power over a very short window of time, and you have a lot of recovery in between reps, 45 seconds in between plays. So you can lift really heavy stuff, shorten your sets down quite a bit. But if you want to build more like endurance or ability to kind of do something for a longer period of time in your sport, then you can make your rep schemes appropriate where you have less rest periods and you're working for longer durations, so you have an increased heart rate and you let your heart rate run the course.
Exactly. That simple framework, having a good movement prep and then having the training sets, whether it's 2 or 3 big training blocks, just like you outlined. And then maybe you have some type of finisher. And then really it's like, are we gaining mass? Are we gaining strength? Are we trying to build tissue endurance with it? And you kind of have to have a priority list. What is my most important priority? Because as soon as you say like, well, I want all 3 things, like, sorry, muscle cells don't do that. There's type 1, type 2, type 2, A, B, and X. They all have different makeups of mitochondrial density and their contractile strength and when the nervous system kicks them on. So we're all built with the same physiology. And you cannot have your cake and eat it too when it comes to all this. You cannot be the most conditioned and the strongest and the most powerful. Impossible. I don't care what anyone says. I learned that in grad school from a PhD professor who's been doing it for 30 years and taught me, here are the muscle cells. They are different. Mm-hmm. And when you train them, you bias them depending on how you do it.
Yep.
And if it feels like a sweat fest and it's reduced rest, you're probably not lifting as much weight. You're probably getting very tired, both locally in your muscle and definitely in your heart and your breathing. Guess what? That's a conditioning workout first and foremost.
Yeah.
Now, can you get stronger doing that? Yeah, for sure. Can you get more stable? Sure. Can you get more resilient? Hell yeah. Yep. But it's a conditioning workout as priority 1, and you will not be the world's strongest man with that. So you have to set your priority list, and that kind of helps you gauge your work to rest and potentially which exercises. A single arm front squat is going to tax your core stability a lot. A double kettlebell squat is going to fry all the big muscles because it's frankly just more power if you're lifting 2 heavy bells. So you have to, between your exercise choice and your work to rest and clearly your load, you are setting whether you want to build hardware, build conditioning, or move often and get really fit and get good at the skilled patterns.
Yeah. And we would build this into like a cycle for like your macro cycle for the year as to like a preseason. Are you doing things that are more, preseason would be more power building than prior preseason, and like your off season, you'll be doing more of your strength hypertrophy type work. So hypertrophy type work, grow the muscle. Preseason, let's really fortify that muscle and increase the speed of contraction and make sure it can work at a high sport speed relative to what it is that you do. In season, you can maintain your intensity, but you cut your volume down big time. And then in your postseason, you recover as you need to, and then start your off season back over again. So that's how we would layer it versus this bodybuilding type model, just as for comparison purposes, which has much more of a, similar periodization run period of 6-8 weeks of a run period and then reset. But you're kind of right back. You're always doing the same type of hypertrophy based work to try to grow.
Right.
And that's not really what an athlete needs. An athlete doesn't need consistent growth. It needs to grow for a bit, and then it needs to master the use of that new tissue and transfer it into the sport they play.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that it comes down to what are your goals. And I think it's honest for people's goals to change throughout life. So if your own training hasn't just flat out changed, that means your goal is always the same, which is a little stagnant in my thought. I think it's good to have periods where
very stagnant in your thought.
yeah. So maybe go through periods where I really want to get more mobile. I want to go through periods where I want to jump higher and get more ballistic through my body. And maybe times where it's like, I feel a little soft, I weigh a little light. How about I gain some muscle in this cycle? And I think it's great for you to have a little change of goals, whether it's, once a year, once every 5 years, and to have a little evolution, or you just have a different sport. You're a multi-sport athlete and you're kind of switching gears a little bit. I think it's great to have different goals. It keeps life exciting when it's a little variable, and that means your training should change.
Yeah, both of these things remind me of this patient that I've had that's so much fun. So this lady was really passionate about training, period, but mostly about like lifting heavy was really good. She really wanted to kind of be competitive on a national level in the powerlifting type movements, deadlifts and things like that. And then, but her prior world was really being an expert in yoga and really loving like the yoga and the movement and like the flexibility and all of these things. And it's like, in talking with her as we watched, she had back pain, which when you say those two things together, it makes perfect sense to us. You're like, you can't do both. You can't be like a yoga, like, go and be with the monks in India and then at the same time, be the best powerlifter in the country. Like those two things don't go together.
Yeah.
Now you could be an excellent powerlifter and do some yoga and appreciate that you're not going to be the best yoga person, but you could do some good yoga and be great for your body. I totally support that. But to be the best at both at the same time is just that's not viable. It's not how the body works. It can't do both things.
No. One's encouraging stiffness in a simple range of motion. Yep. And the other is we don't want stiffness at all.
Yeah. Exactly.
And, I'd say the same thing for really to be, you can almost say to be good at two things. I think, all of the greats, whether it's, Bo Jackson or Michael Jordan, be able to play two elite sports at an elite level. That's crazy, right? So for an athlete to be elite at two different sports. But at least Jordan was good at two sports that required a lot of athleticism and a lot of ballistic movement and a fair amount of some conditioning.
Yeah.
But when you talk about powerlifting and yoga, talk about the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do a few things because you care about a few things, the more tightly aligned, the better. But if you're going to do a flexibility art and then an art of a lot of mass and a lot of stiffness, well.
I think that's an interesting point on stiffness as you think about it. Like, people could take stiffness as a bad thing, but in powerlifting or even the Olympic lifts and these high levels of load, stiffness is required, and stiffness beyond the basics. So a guy like Bo Jackson or whatever any athlete you could think of that's having to move dynamically and get stiff at certain moments, the amount of stiffness necessary is probably significantly less for less periods of time than it is for somebody doing a power lift deadlift. If they're doing deadlifting and it's a 3 to 5 second rep, they have to get so much stiffness around the spine to be able to lift as much weight as they're lifting at really heavy loads, where not only are they using, their existing muscle tissue, in addition to that, their core and their Valsalva strategies, and then in addition to that, a weight belt to provide some more tension on the midsection so that they push out into it and everything really locks up. Because of that everyone knows is the weakest point. So you have to stabilize the crap out of that to do that movement. But if you lowered the weight of that, by 10 or 20%, all of a sudden you don't need all that stiffness anymore.
Yeah.
And now you can move with speed.
Yeah.
You can move in a more efficient way.
Yeah.
And it's about control. You still have to have control. But I think that there's always this law of diminishing returns. When we're talking about relative to sports, relative to movement, there's nothing wrong with doing a heavy deadlift and being great at that. If that's what you're trying to accomplish, then by all means. My concern is that when I see athletes and they're trying to PR their deadlift constantly, and trying to PR their back squat constantly, and then we're fighting against injuries that have occurred in those spaces. It's like, well, how strong is too strong? How stiff is too stiff? Like at some point, this is diminishing returns.
Yeah, especially, I think we can agree there's a few priorities that most humans love. We love longevity. We're kind of interested in having a great time in this life for as long as we can. I think that's a fairly safe, top
absolutely.
3 for most people.
Sure, yeah.
And a lot of us like looking good. So we like having enough muscle and enough curve, enough hey, I'm reasonably fit. I look good in clothes. I look, I can do things with my body. So I think there's some safe priorities where that's most people have that. What frustrates me in talking with people is when their small goals don't actually match their big goal, because that tells me that they either don't know, which I'll grant it, most people just don't know. They don't know how to take something a big goal, like I want to be able to hike, Half Dome. I want to be able to climb Half Dome and climb and scale a rock and mountain climb. Great, I love that goal. Let's see your training. Oh, you didn't put it together. I want to be able to play indoor soccer once a week and have a good time to it. Your training is not looking like it's supporting that. So I love goal setting, and I think it's important to look at health span and longevity and vitality, and also think of more fun, purpose-driven goals, and then help people make sure, is your current work going in that direction? Because oftentimes we see that's not. And even for clinicians that we talk to and interview, you haven't thought enough about this, or you haven't ventured to the realm of the unknown, of understanding the realm of Pilates and yoga and powerlifting, Olympic lifting and kettlebell lifting. You haven't read works of Vern Gambetta and works of Pavel Tsatsouline. And when you really stretch the bandwidth, or stretch the breadth of what you understand, now you can actually put things together for a very particular goal because you have a more broad understanding of how to train for different things.
Yeah, 100%. Remember Troy at our EDH gym. Troy's played football at USC. He's like 65 or so now. Probably about 60. Super competitive guy. Super great shape, like phenomenal shape, strong, lifts heavy. Really enjoyed lifting heavy. But he played football at USC, and then that was when he was 20, and now he's 60. So, but in his mind, it's the same, which is great. Most of us have this approach. And in the gym, he's killing it. Like he's trying to, we're doing lifting, and he's obviously competing against everybody else and wants to have the best bench and have the best squat and have the best deadlift. And he's just killing himself to like continue to have these PRs and these greatness. And it's like, and then he started coming to see us for treatment. He's like, oh, my back is killing me and my leg, I have sciatica, leg pain, my shoulder hurts. I'm like, well, movement-wise, you have the mechanics. Lifestyle-wise, you come in here and kick butt on it. But then you do go sit at a desk and you're doing your day job for most of the time. You're not really playing football at anywhere close anymore. Look like you probably still could, honestly. Like he looks like a tight end, like he's really well built. But we talked a lot about this idea, and at first he was really hesitant about this idea of like, let's just unload a little bit. Why is winning in the gym so important to you? Just because you're competitive, I get that. But if your value is that you want to go outside and play sports with your kids, not hurt, sleep better, perform better at the office, have a more free life where you're not in pain, not trying to like, do I get my shoulder injected or do I get a spine injection? What if we just shifted your weight room goal and brought it down slightly? Where you stayed incredibly fit, incredibly healthy. I can show you how to just change your programming slightly. You'll still be as good as you are now. You probably will not be as strong as you are. You might lose 10 or 15 pounds off your PRs, but you'll be strong as shit for whatever you want to do, like move logs on the property, whatever it is you want to do, and you won't hurt anymore.
I tested that. What you just said, I actually tested that theory. So for, my squat was around... my squat was around like 350. I weigh $175. So I had a 350 back squat. And I was curious, what if I don't do a barbell squat for a year? I didn't do it for a whole year. And all I did was front squatting with the kettlebell. So I did double rack, single rack. I did some calisthenic bodyweight, pistols. And I'm curious if after a year of just doing that type of squatting, if I can come back and be just as strong. I came back, it had been a year, and I trained with Jonathan, and Jonathan's like, oh, I'm doing some back squats. I said, I haven't done back squats. Maybe it was longer than a year. I haven't done back squat in so long that I wouldn't even know where to start. So I put on, a $135, and it was really easy, and I put a $185, and it was easy. And I climbed all the way up to like 315, and the bar was still moving pretty smooth. And the point is I did that same thing with bench press, by the way. Didn't do bench press for a year. And just like you said, maybe I lost 10, 15 pounds. So, out of 300 pounds, that's what, 3%, 4%. So I lost 3% strength by not actually touching the pattern at all. All I did was many other patterns that were far more complex, broader range of motion. Joint felt better. Fascia feels better. I feel more free than ever. I didn't do any more of this strict, refined motion. Yeah, my muscle got a little smaller. I weigh a little bit less. I feel a ton better, and my strength dipped 3%. So I did that test with the bench press, and I did it with the squat. And it's kind of funny how like people hold on to a fear of like, well, I'm strong right there. I don't want to let it go. I had one dad, a 50-year-old dad kind of tell me like, man, I got to stop. If I got all this like pec right here, I don't want it to just like turn into a boob. Yep. He was afraid that it would just like go to mush.
Fair.
Like, the body doesn't do that when you like,
still stimulated in some way.
Yeah, I'm just not stimulating in that pattern. And so there's this fear that if you don't keep training in the way that you've been doing, you'll lose it. Yeah. It's a really inappropriate fear.
It is, but it's a big fear. I think that's a big point of it. Yeah, Troy came back, and he's been doing this for 2 or 3 years now. It's been so much. I haven't seen him since. I see him in the gym every day working out. And he's been pain-free with the process,
And he just let go of those,
and he looks the same. He's probably lost 10 or 15 pounds because now he doesn't have the big weight to carry around, and he's not as bulky as he was, but he's super lean, super cut. Like, he looks great. So it's goals. What's your goal? Set it up your goal. Run to it. If your goal is to be the strongest person, that's great. Then just ask yourself, why, have a why.
Yeah.
And if your why is justified, then great. Yeah. But you will find yourself needing more rehab help, needing more body work, needing more massage, needing more stretching, because you're going to push yourself to a limit that's going to cause likely failure. That's the whole point of the exercise.
Yes.
Or you could take that off a little bit and train really, really effectively in a bit of a safer manner and not have to have near the side effects.
Yeah, I think, I love using the word bodybuilding so many times in patients. It's like if we see some atrophy, time to bodybuild.
Absolutely.
We have a little quad atrophy. We have a little glute atrophy.
yeah.
You had an injury through the calf. Time to bodybuild.
Go back to, there's a time and a place for isolation.
Place, yes.
You got to get some hypertrophy. You got to get some control.
Let's bodybuild. We're going to measure and let's get the hardware up in this area while we do some complex patterns. And then once the complex patterns look good and the bodybuilding did its thing, we have better muscle and tendon and vitality in that segment of the body. Let's bring back into more kind of functional training, functional fitness. I think it definitely has a phenomenal role. I would never poo-poo it for the appropriate time. And I also think the older people get, the more they should kind of actually retreat into a little bit of bodybuilding, because frankly, you got sarcopenia at the age of 55. Your hormones start to drop some,
Sure.
and growth factor starts to drop some. We start losing a little bit of muscle. I think it's like 1 to 3%, kind of trickling effect after, in our mid 50s.
Yeah.
So a little bit of bodybuilding is really helpful for people who are older, because it's just like, let's keep this muscle a little bit. Yeah. So we go back to hardware training.
And it's tremendously safe for the most part, So it's by far, it's a very good option for many, many reasons. I think we've gotten too far away from it and too functional at times as an industry. There's like we moved it completely away from like the knee extension as an idea, which is a very common bodybuilding exercise.
Yeah.
Those guys didn't have knee pain.
Yeah.
I mean, they were doing knee extensions like to the death, like hundreds of reps a day. Like, I mean, and every toes out, toes in, up, down, all these little variations you could think of. And like knee pain wasn't an issue, and then, then we poo-pooed it. It's like, oh man, if you do this, this was one study showed that it could be a little bit higher incidence on your ACL. So let's not ever do knee extensions again.
Yeah. Let's go to the back squat again.
Yeah. I had a doctor tell me this on Friday. The knee extensions were crazy. I'm like, oh my gosh, you have so much literature to read. Or just listen to what we're telling you. But either way, it's crazy.
Yeah, and for that, I do think, powerlifting has a place. I think Olympic lifting has a place. Absolutely. I think it's great for a lot of young people to try and lift some heavy things, because it stimulates growth more so than anything. To put something heavy in your hands and challenge yourself, I have become more of a fan of front squat and back squat for that reason. I think it's good to hold something in front and challenge the midsection a lot. So I have definitely appreciated that. So I'm far favor of a Zercher or a front loaded or double racked. Everything in the front, you won't be able to squat as much, but you will gain strength through the body in a healthy, balanced way than if you just put 1,000 pounds on your back. So I have leaned a lot more on that in the last 20 years. I think it's great to lift heavy, especially at certain times of our life, to really build.
Absolutely. There's a time to challenge your body to lift heavy and get good response out of it. We're not saying any of these things are wrong. Just understand your why, what it is you're trying to do, and then choose appropriately. Don't find yourself just caught up in a system where you just think, well, this is what weightlifting is. That's more my point than anything. I think that weightlifting and training is doing this, and it's not. And a majority of the people seem to think that bodybuilding is the only way to organize a programming pattern, is that you have to do chest and tries, back and bis, and then legs on different days. And that is not truth at all. And it's definitely not how you train an athlete. So just there. So back to what we are doing. We're working with 2A Pro, and we're doing a lot of tactical work with these guys.
Yeah.
Super exciting project that we're on with them, where they're wanting to improve. They have a good following. They're wanting to improve and educate the tactical community on this idea of fitness and training. Mm-hmm. So we're doing quite a connection with them on a co-podcast. So we'll hear this once a month where we'll bring them on. We're on their podcast. We'll bring them here so you guys can see it both ways. Really, really enlightening to talk to them about the stuff we're doing with the tactical community. But it's this idea of a functional training to improve performance in that environment.
Yes. So it's going to be definitely. So we have a split for them. It's a really simple split. In case you're curious, if I was interviewing with Tony and Tony asked, well, Russ, what are you going to do? Like, all right, I have 3 splits. I have an A, B, and C workout. The A workout has about 10 to 15 minutes of movement prep that largely focuses on rotation. So we'll do like a thoracic bridge, a side rotation, kind of work on how the hips rotate into a Cossack squat. So we're going to do a lot of opening of how the body moves in that, in that plane. And then we'll do a single bell routine just to kind of keep it simple. We're going to have one bell, and you're going to own a single arm front squat pattern, a single leg RDL pattern, a single arm swing, a Turkish get up. We're going to throw in an arm bar in there, and we'll throw in a military press. And we'll have a work to rest ratio of about 30 seconds of rest because we're just starting with this routine. It's going to be enough rest to feel partially recovered. And then we'll do 2 to 3 circuits of about 5 to 8 reps on each side with these exercises. And that's an example of our single kettlebell routine. And at the end, we're going to hammer the stomach. We'll do, we'll do some hard abdominal exercises with an ab wheel. And that's an example of the first session. But all patterns are complex, which is partly why it does become a bit of a sweat fest, because every pattern you're using 800 muscles. So when people are kind of curious of like, well, what does Russ mean when it's a sweat fest? If you're doing leg extension back to bodybuilding, you're using 4 muscles. Maybe you could argue a 5th muscle if you include your tibialis anterior. So it's a 5 muscle exercise. So you're doing work, and you have 5 muscles that are demanding a lot of blood and a lot of energy to go right there and a lot of oxygen. If you do a single arm front squat, you're using 800. So 4, maybe 5, 800. Therein lies the oxygen demand. Oxygen demand means your body's going to release a shit ton of heat, so you will sweat to cool your body. And that becomes probably, first and foremost, a conditioning workout. And then second, we're going to get strong through the grip. So it's definitely be a grip-focused, core-centric conditioning workout, and that's how I'd frame it.
So now, when you look at your workout, you chose these patterns, and you also chose this rest period to accomplish a few very clear goals so that you could build more things on. That's right. And that's probably relevant to their activities, yeah?
That's right. So it'll be so it is like a warrior mentality. And Jake had a phenomenal question. Like, why do I care about these exercises? And, if we're thinking about sports, I failed to think in the tactical community. I had a hard time with offense, in all honesty. Offense of like being able to sniper or shoot or move around, hedges, and being able to be in a tactical environment and be on offense. It was hard. I was thinking, agility. I was thinking of power. I was thinking of climbing over things. But then it dawned on me that's like, there's offense and defense. And in the tactical world, defense is a big, big deal. If your friend goes down, if your colleague goes down, if your team goes down, if someone needs your help, then you have to ruck with weight. You have to grab someone, put them over your shoulder and move. You need to drag someone. You need to be insanely resilient through your grip and core, because those are the 2 things that functionally give out first. And if you have it in your midsection and you can go for 30 minutes of a very intense core-centric activity, which means that's the area that wants to break and you're not letting it break, and the same thing through your grip. If you're able to hold on to something for a long period of time, you become very worthwhile in a tactical environment because of defense. If something happens, you can be relied on to get someone to safety.
And then I love that. And then it's part of the cardiovascular component comes down to a variety of things. But can your heart rate drop? Can you get yourself back under control? Can you get your respiratory rate down? So obviously, if you're fatigued and you're breathing hard and you're tense, your shot accuracy is going to drop significantly.
Absolutely.
And then if your ability to recover is usually what keeps you alive.
That's the nuance of conditioning, because I think in the world we tend to think of like, oh, that's cardio. You mean like I'll go for a run? Like, well, if you take the best marathoner and put them through that workout, they're going to get effing crushed. Doesn't really care about your VO2 max when you have to handle an object that's like a third of your body weight over and over and over again. A little skinny, wiry cross-country runner is going to be worthless. So it is conditioning, but it's conditioning with strength. And that is a whole different case. And it's more of a wrestler conditioning where you have to apply a lot of pressure, and can your muscles, tendons, and joints handle that pressure over and over and over and get a shit ton of mitochondria built into the cells to handle that. So it's not just, it's strength stamina with a massive cardiopulmonary insult to it. But it becomes a progressive conditioning workout when you start changing your work to rest ratio, which is where the magic happens. You don't need as much rest when your heart recovers quicker. And so as the workout gets easier, you just start compressing.
I think it's super interesting to start thinking about the needs of these athletes. So that being massive stuff. And in my time working with some of the special forces guys and the military community, it's really interesting how much I learned about their endurance as well, like that they have to hike for such long distances. They have to put a pack on their back and ruck, if you will, or put 60 pounds on their body, and then they might go for multiple days, like 16 miles, 14, 15, 16 miles a day, and just continue to truck for a while, get into an area, and then go into a combat environment where now they have this, high explosive moments where they have to attack and defend and do their thing, and then usually get back out of there in some sort of a long duration environment as well. So the same thing would be true like modern day for like someone who's hunting. So if you got on a long hunt, it might be a multiple day hike. You may be having to traverse some really nasty landscape. Your legs have to be super, super strong. You're usually carrying some weight with you, hopefully a lot more weight going home. And then
you were successful.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then when it comes time to shoot, you walked up on the environment. If you like approached it, maybe you're just coming off a big steep mountain. Boom, you see your target, and then you got to get yourself calmed down, get set up, get oriented, and your ability to recover there allows you to be effective in that moment.
As you're talking, you just went from a soldier to a hunter. I think even in the fire world, where you need to help someone, probably when you're tired, you've been managing a fire, you've been managing the structure, you're in a moment where it's like, I've already been working a lot and now I need to save a life. So I think it applies a lot in the entire service industry of law enforcement, police, tactical, military, and fire, of the ability of, can you tolerate a lot of stress, and then can you perform when you're your most tired? It's the resilience quality, for sure.
Yeah. So it's a cool project. If you guys are interested in this, you can check it out. We'll put a link down in the notes below. But it's the 2A program. So they have a podcast, and we're going to have the program on the podcast. We're also going through a demo with them, so they'll be going through this over the next few months. So they're doing workouts. We've tested them. We're intervening with them. So all that's done through that channel, both on their channel and ours. But if you're interested, tune into those for sure. Otherwise, thank you guys. I hope this is helpful in your pursuit of training and thinking about different programs, how you can manipulate these programs to be useful. So I hope this is going to be something you can carry over to either your own benefit or to that of the clients that you're working with. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.